So we know how to import libraries of code when we want to do something beyond Python's built-in capabilities. But sometimes you don't just want access to somebody's code, you want access to their data. And if you're a programmer that has data that you want to share with other programmers, you want to make sure that you can do so safely. What I mean by that is, you don't want someone to have access to data that they shouldn't have access to. You don't want someone to be able to tamper with or delete data that isn't theirs, or that they shouldn't be able to tamper with or delete. So, when you're in that situation, you want to build something called an API. What is an API? If we Google it, we can see that API stands for Application Programming Interface, which is a big old fancy word, but if we break down what we just said the goal was, it actually makes a lot of sense. So let's break it down word by word. In this context, what does application actually mean? And if you Google it, applications in coding, this definition comes up. An application is a computer software package that performs a specific function for an end user or another application based on carefully designed features. So an application is a type of program that does certain things. We can think of the programs that we've been building as the beginnings of applications. So as far as we're concerned, what we are building, we can start to think about them as partial apps. And for now, we can just think of them as apps, applications. Now, application programming interface, there are many types of applications, right? That's a word that has a meaning outside of coding. So the programming, P of API, simply references the fact that you're accessing this information, you're accessing these applications via programs, via coding, and you are building an interface to connect multiple applications together through programming. And that's exactly what we said we were doing, right? You have an app somewhere that has access to this data. Someone else has a different app, a different program they're writing that does not have access to the data, and you want to build an interface so that they can connect, so that this other program can access the data on your app. And so you build a piece of software called an API, an application programming interface, to allow those things to connect. Later, we'll talk about how to build your own APIs, but for now, let's understand how to use one that already exists. And let's use a real-world example. So let's say you want to build a website where you can put in the names of two actors and see what TV shows and movies they've worked on together. So you need access to data about those two actors and their movies and their TV shows. There's a website that has a lot of that information, and actually I have here in my bookmarks, iMDB. The MDB of iMDB actually stands for Movie Database, because iMDB is a database full of data that we can access as web users when we want to look up this information. But iMDB, it turns out, actually also has an API that they have built in Python that allows programmers to access this data inside their code. And when I looked that up, I got Python IMDb Py API because I thought IMDb Py might already exist, and it does. You can see here it is now called Cinemagoer. Cinemagoer, previously known as IMDb Py, is a Python package for retrieving and managing the data of the IMDb movie database. So this is exactly what we want. And when you're using an API, just like when you're using any other library of data, you really need to go to the documentation for that library. Otherwise, you don't know how to use it. I have no context for what information I'm going to need in order to use this API correctly. But I do know that it works just like any other library. And what I mean by that is this library of code, this API, does not currently live on my computer. So I'm going to need to download it. I'm going to need to install it onto my computer. And then I'm going to need to import that code into my program in order to use it. And if we scroll, that's exactly the first thing that it tells us. You always start by installing the library that you're about to use, and it tells us to do this with pip install, which we know how to use, we've used it before, and then it goes through some examples of how to use it. So let's start there, let's get this installed and see what that looks like. So I'm going to open my terminal, and you can do this on any terminal that you have, your one in VS Code, whatever works best for you. I am most comfortable doing this through my terminal built into my computer, so that's how I'm going to do it. So I'm in my home directory. I'm where I'm meant to be. And so now I can follow these directions of pip install Cinemagoer. For me, I know that I have Python 2 and Python 3 on my computer. So if I just purely do pip install, it's going to try and install it in Python 2. So I need to go in and do pip 3 install Cinemagoer, and I hit enter, and it does exactly what it says it's going to do. It's collecting the Cinemagoer library, and then it tells us that Cinemagoer actually relies on these other ones as well. So we didn't just install Cinemagoer, we also installed something called SQL Alchemy, we installed something called LXML, and we installed something called Greenlet, and we installed a specific version of Greenlet. That's what this is telling us. All of this in order to make Cinemagoer install correctly. And it's installing still. It's going to take a little minute, so I'm going to skip ahead and show you what happens once it is installed. Okay, it is installed. You may notice that the time has changed in the video just by about 1.5 minutes, but it can take a little bit of time for these things to install. That's completely fine. My computer is also telling me that there is a new version of pip available. You don't have to, but I'm gonna do that just because it is good practice to just always be up to date. And you can see that this one installed a little bit quicker. So it always depends on the library that you're using and what is being installed on your computer. It might take some time. It's totally fine. So now that we have Cinemagoer installed on our computers, let's actually take a look at how to use it. So I'm going to open up my Cinemagoer test file that I wrote, I started before starting this video. Cinemagoer test, you can see it's empty, but I want to see if this works. So first and foremost, I'm going to follow these instructions. Now that this library lives on my computer, now that this API is installed, I'm going to import it into this file so that I can see if it's working. And I'm going to create an instance. This is what it's called, create an instance of the Cinemagoer class. We're actually going to talk about what classes are next class of JTC. But for now, all we need to know is that what that means is I'm creating an instance of this thing that I'm importing here, Cinemagoer, and now we can use it. So let's just see if this works as expected. So it tells me there's a few different things that I can do here. I can get a movie if I know that movie's ID, and then I will get all this information about the movie. Let's see, these are all still related to the movie, but it looks like I can also search a person. So that might be related to the goal that I was talking about that I wanted to do. So what is our goal here? Let's write it out. Get info about 2 actors and see what they've worked on together. And we probably won't get to this goal in this video, but that's okay. We just want to be able to think about what you might want to do with an API and how you would figure out how to get there. So there's more docs here. I want to know more about the usage of how this works, what I can do with this API. So I can search a movie and I can search a person, and then this tells me a little bit more about what I can do with that search. So let's search 2 people. I'm going to search 2 people from my favorite movie is Underworld, with Kate Beckinsale and Bill Nighy. Those are 2 people in that movie. So I'm going to do exactly what it says, ia.search, and you can see all of this stuff comes up. All of these things are things that I can now do because I have installed this API. And when I use these things, it will pull data from iMDB, and I will have access to that in my program. So that is how this works. So I'm going to search 2 people, Kate Beckinsale, and I'm going to do the same thing for Bill Nighy. Not Bill Nye, if anyone is wondering. Bill Nighy is another delightful human. And I just want to print out what these things are. So I'm going to save this Kate B and Bill N. And now we can print out this data. Kate B, and let's just do one. and let's just see if this works. So again, you can go through your terminal that's built into your computer. You can do your terminal in VS Code, whatever you want to do. And I'm going to run this code and see if it worked. First of all, did Cinemagoer get installed correctly? Am I using Cinemagoer correctly? And what it sends me back if I am using it correctly. So I'm going to run my code. For me, that means I'm going to say, hey, I want you to use Python 3 to run this Cinemagoer file, but I am realizing this actually started me in my home directory, which is not where I am meant to be. I can see the path here that I need to get this to match in order to be able to run this code directly. So I'm going to cd into, so I'm in L Schacter, which means I can just follow exactly this. So I can cd into documents and then into JTC from there. And now I should be able to run this code. So Python 3, Cinemagoer, and it knows what I'm talking about, and it runs it. And it's taking a minute because it had to go all the way back in through the API to find that data. And we can see that it's empty. So let's check if I spelled this name correctly. Kate Beckinsale? Is that not what I wrote? There she is. In all her vampiric glory. Oh, so maybe the names... Okay, so this tells us something. Maybe the names have to be lowercase in order for us to actually collect data. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so things that I did not know about this API until I tested it. And you can see that it searched for a person. In its example, it says there's a lowercase a and it got Angelina Jolie. So we can learn a lot by just testing things out and seeing how it works. And we can see that we now got this person. We actually got 2 people that it matched with. And so we'll need to figure out which one we're talking about. We know it's this person, but we would have to allow our code to do that as well. And now we are on our way to figuring out how to use this API to get to our goal of what we want.